Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Written Page podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, coming to you over YouTube from the city of Jackson, here in the state of Tennessee, in the United States of America. And today we have a very interesting and very special guest that I've been wanting to talk to her for a long, long time. And recently there was a specific reason why, and that's what we're going to be doing today in the next few minutes, chatting about Spanish language, Spanish culture, some of her work. She's a voiceover artist, a writer, a podcaster with huge online presence. She's an actress, and she's also the author of many books. One of them, The A to Z, or Z, as they say in the United Kingdom, of Spanish culture beyond Toros and Flamenco. And she's joining us from the beautiful, beautiful city of London, England. Pilar Ortí. Welcome, Pilar, and thanks for answering our call this morning.
It's great to be here with you and your listeners, and it's been a wonderful day in London today. It's already dark, but it's been a nice day. Which
Is
yeah,
it ever not dark in London in the afternoon?
well, it's just no, it's nighttime almost. It's coming to 4:30 here, but that's it. The sun is setting, but it's been a lovely day. Anyway, that's London.
Well, you live in London right now, but you grew up in Madrid,
Yes.
and you were educated, if I'm not mistaken, in English. And then at 18 years old, you moved to the United Kingdom. So I'm wondering, how important, Pilar, was it for you to grow up in between two languages, two cultures? How important was that for your, personal development?
I think looking back, because of course these things are all about understanding who you are and and what's happened in your life to make you who you are. I think it's been an absolute honor and blessing and such a pleasure. Just to give you a bit of background of why I grew up, why I had a British education. Well, why I followed the British system.
While in Spain.
Yeah, while in Spain is I don't know. My parents actually spent 4 years in the States, and when they returned to Spain and had me, they decided that it would be a good idea to put me in an English school, so I would learn to speak English, and of course that would maybe open up some opportunities. And that's what I did. So from the age of 5, I was in King's College. It's a school in Madrid, following the English curriculum. And I think it's great because one, the work culture, the Anglo-Saxon work culture suits me better. Academic, the way of studying in school suited me better. It was very specialized, and it's just opened my eyes to a whole different way of thinking. Of course, the language, I love the English language. I can read Shakespeare, which is very nice, but I can also read Lorca. So it's so from that point of view, I think it's so I think it's just given me opportunities more than just because I know I am bilingual, which is always good. It's also allowed me to find what I enjoyed most between those two cultures.
Yeah, I understand that really well because,
Mm,
growing up in the northwest of Spain, I already was able to speak two languages, Spanish and Galician. And
yes.
then, of course, Portugal was very close by, so I did learn some Portuguese. But I was always interested in the English language and French and in languages in general. But of course, I didn't have the opportunity to be educated in English or in French. In that sense, Pilar, how different do you think your childhood was because of the way that you were brought up in a language such as English in the capital of Spain?
Yeah, well, uh, I think it really it made me who I am. So I mean, who knows what would have happened if it would have been different. But so my parents, as I said, they left. They were in the US from 68 to 72 in
Were they studying
Stanford.
there or
Yeah, they were in, my father was in Stanford and my mother was his wife, and my mother was teaching English in a school nearby, and my father was studying. And so their brains also, I mean, the 60s in Spain were very different to the 60s in the States. So they were exposed to something very different. And so it just meant that they saw different ways of living, different ways of being. And so when they went back, they brought a lot of that with them. They brought a lot of what they'd learned there. They brought a lot of their friends actually also were back in Madrid with them, and the language as well. Both my parents are, my father's dead now, but my mother's, she's fluent in English still. Both of them were fluent in English all their lives. So my household has always been very bilingual. I grew up watching, when we could, we would watch films in the original language with subtitles, even if they weren't in English as well. We prefer to watch a lot of films. Even now with my husband, we watch a lot of Scandinavian drama, and it doesn't matter, we like to read the subtitles. And then it also, again, at least, I don't know what, to be honest, I'm a little bit removed from Spain at the moment, but at least then, and probably now, there was quite a difference in the school system.
Mm.
So from what I heard, the Spanish system was a lot more about memorizing and regurgitating information, whereas the English system then still had a lot of having to analyze things and give your opinion and things like that. And so that helped me, well, that helped me develop and allowed me to also to follow a little bit more what I enjoyed, rather than having to follow a set curriculum as well. So there was all of that. And then if I can just add, again, I was very lucky. I was able to come to London in 1990 and study at a university, which again is completely different. There's a lot of focus here on clubs and societies, on you finding yourself as a person while you're studying. So again, that really suited me because I like doing lots of different things. And so being in the university here also allowed me to do all of that.
Now, it suited you, Pilar, to such an extent that you actually changed your direction and you decided to train as an actress in London at some point in the 1990s. How influential do you think was that kind of training for the kind of activities that you pursued later on in your life?
So I loved acting since I was really little. And again, not in my school as much, but in British schools, you've always had drama as part of the curriculum. In Spain, you didn't have that. I don't know
Mhm.
what it's like now. So the fact that I was in a school that not just put on plays, but they allowed me. I ran my first drama workshop at the age of 10. I'd never been in a drama workshop, but I went into a classroom with 5-year-olds and we did a drama workshop. And then I used to put on plays with my friends. I did all of these things. And I, but I didn't, again, I wasn't sure if I wanted to become an actress, because it's one thing to like acting, the other is to be an actress.
Mhm.
So again, I was lucky. I went to Imperial to do, I did a biology degree, and then I just thought the need to act hadn't left me. And I thought, well, if I go to drama school, which again, I was very lucky to be able to do that. If I go to drama school, maybe I will stop wanting to be an actress because it'll be boring because you have to do it every day. And that didn't happen. And what it's done, so I then did about 10 years of running a theater company. And I've been working as a voiceover actress up until now. And what the training did, as well as teaching me how to act, was it also gave me a very strong voice as
Mhm.
well. It gave me lots of physical self-awareness, and that's been really helpful all throughout um, my life, basically. So yeah.
Yeah, I understand that too because I remember, when I was doing radio work in Nashville during graduate school, and I'd host music shows on a radio
Mm.
station there in Nashville. But there were some people, some professors who thought I was wasting my time doing that. You should be just reading the books. You should be working on your dissertation. You should be,
Oh,
it's not that I was pushing everything else aside to do the radio, but
yeah.
I think one thing they didn't understand was that radio work actually, if you're going to be teaching, actually does help a great deal because you're speaking in
Yes.
public, even though the public may not be right there in the studio with you.
Yeah.
So I can understand
Yes,
what you're
yes.
talking about quite well. Now, uh, one of the most interesting things, and I'm sure that you get asked this quite a bit, that I found out about you was the fact that you are a voiceover actress, and I wonder how that came to be. How do you get into that kind of line of work?
Well, it was for me. It was always a natural progression from being in the acting world. As in, the actors, they do everything. They do theater, TV, especially here, film, everything, radio. Not well, maybe radio, podcasting now. Um, However, it was very simple. I was subscribed to The Stage, which is a newspaper here for the profession, and I would look through all the adverts. And there weren't like very good jobs there, but it was always worth looking. And an agency was looking for foreign voice artists. So I answered the I answered the advert. And then about a year later, the guy who was running the agency then invited me to do a demo. And then a few days or a few weeks later, actually, I had my first job. And I mean, one of the things that just thinking back about my childhood as well, I've always been a good sight reader. So I've always been able to, as I learned to read, I was able to pick up a book and just read it and read aloud without problem. And so voiceover comes quite easily because you just pick up the piece of paper and read. And I'm able to bring it to life. So it suited me. It was nice. I do have a book, if viewers are interested, called "Hi, I'm Here for a Recording." And it's quite fun. That was a lot of fun to write as well. And it just speaks about that and how all of that happened. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions about that as well.
Yeah, well, during the Spanish 250 class that I'm teaching at the university right now, which was one of the reasons why, I got in touch with you to
Yes.
record this conversation. One of the things that I do tell the students is that in Spain, a lot of the movies are actually dubbed into
Mhm.
Spanish. People don't get to hear the real voices of the actors. And I wonder what your take is on that as a voiceover artist. What do you think about that practice, which, of course, as I also explained to the students, has a historical reason, very very specific historical reason, having to do with the dictatorship of Francisco Franco in Spain. Do you think that in any way makes it more difficult for kids and for people in general in Spain to learn a foreign language, whereas, for example, in Portugal, movies are not dubbed as much as they are in Spain, and maybe that makes it easier for viewers to get accustomed to the sound of the language. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yes. So unfortunately, I haven't done any movies. I've done a cartoon in English. I've never dubbed any movies, which would have been a lot of fun, but a lot of hard work as well. Um, I I think what was great is, I don't know what it's like now, but there was a point where on TV you had dual
Hmm.
the dual
Yeah, you
channels.
can change. Yeah.
Yes, I was so excited when they introduced that, because then it meant you could choose. So if you wanted to listen to something dubbed, then that was fine. And if you wanted to hear it in the original language, albeit maybe without subtitles, and then you could do that. But that would get the voice. And also I remember maybe mid 80s, the La Parabólica,
Hmm. Yeah, the
the
satellite
the
dish.
satellite
But the huge
TV.
one from the
Yes.
80s, not the smaller ones that as they became later.
Yeah, the really big parabolica. So the televisión parabólica came in, which was amazing because
Mm.
suddenly you could get all these the Rai, the Italian, the French, the
The
Sky One
German,
we
yeah.
had. Yes, everything. So I think that you, I mean, it's interesting. I didn't know that in Portugal there's less of a tradition of dubbing, because the Portuguese are great at picking up languages,
Hmm.
actually, more so than Spanish. My husband is Dutch, and again, in his Dutch television, a lot of it isn't dubbed, and
Hmm.
that he learned English mainly through television and just these casual things. So on the one hand, I think it's good. And to be honest, there's some films and some actors that I think are better when they're dubbed in Spanish, because there was a very good, I think the dubbing industry, the voiceover industry is very good in Spain. And some cartoons are lovely as well, much nicer, especially some when they used to be, the Disney used to be dubbed in South America. It was beautiful when they were dubbed, more so than sometimes the original. But I think that yes, for the ear, it's good to train the ear to listen to different languages and encourage people to see art in the language it was created as well.
Yeah, when you talk about those big satellite dishes in the 1980s, it brings back really really nice memories because my grandparents had one of those for the entire community in
Yes.
their building, and so we were able all of a sudden to get not just five TV stations, but all of a sudden we had, stations from all over Europe and even the United States. And that's when I began watching cricket and when I began watching baseball, American football, and things like that. But most of all, I used to just sit there completely transfixed by transmissions, TV shows in Swedish, in German,
Oh,
languages that I
yeah.
did not understand. And I just
Yeah.
sit there and watch them. I didn't know what they were talking about, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was just really enthralling for some reason. And then when I began learning French and English, that
Ah.
really helped a lot. And in my case, we're talking about, before the internet, of
Mm-hmm.
course, just like it is in your case. The ways for me to learn English, for example, were basically to listen to the BBC World Service over shortwave radio, which I
Yes.
did often, and then also listen to music. The Beatles, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley. All the music that I loved was in English or French. I didn't really care much for Spanish music, and
Yeah.
therefore that helps, getting your ear accustomed to
Yeah.
the language and to. But to me, and I don't know if this, maybe this didn't happen to you because you were um, educated in both Spanish and English. But for me, turning on, a French newscast or an English program on satellite dish,
Mm-hmm.
satellite television, and actually understanding what they were saying was almost
Uh-huh.
like a magical discovery to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. Yes. As you say, so it wasn't my experience, but I can imagine like being able suddenly to understand
Mhm.
what is there, what's going on, and a different place to a book as well. So it's more alive as well. And the use of language is different as well. When you're watching something on television, the use of language is very different. And to be able to understand what's going on organically
Mhm.
is yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
Now related to that, Pilar, of course, the internet came.
Oh yeah.
A couple of decades later, a few years later, and I wonder in your view, because you work a lot with distance learning and distance meetings and things like that. It's a very general question, but I wonder in your view and from your experience, in what ways did the internet change the way that we relate to our jobs, to education? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the one way that comes to mind, which follows our conversation, is this thing of having more access to
Hmm.
a lot of things. I think that's unimaginable. I mean, what you and I are talking about learning a language through going to school or seeing different ways of working because, well, in your case, you've moved countries, I've moved countries, things like that. But actually, the internet now gives us access to all of that, either
Hmm.
in real time with real people or through videos or through whatever. So it's this, I mean, it's got a big dark side, but if we just stick into something like this, it just gives you access to a world
Hmm.
and ways of working and ways of living that are amazing. I mean, I'll go very specific now. I'll tell you what it's given me. So I've been doing lots of podcasts. One of them I co-host with my friend Tim, who is in Australia. I've never met Tim, but we have great conversations on the podcast. We can talk for hours. And there's a whole part of his life that I know nothing about, but I know him very well through how he approaches work. And I'm still amazed, and maybe people who've grown up like with this, maybe it's not as interesting, but I'm still amazed that I can talk to someone from Australia. And I'm, in the summer, I'm in my t-shirt, and he's there with his woolly hat when we record.
And it's also speaking almost from the future because of the time difference, right?
Yes,
Because it's
and
it's already like the day after over there.
yes, yeah, and he's about to go to bed, and I'm halfway through my day. Today, just now, just before we're recording, I was talking to someone in South Africa
Mm.
who connected with me because he was listening to my show. And I've met so many people, and I just think it's amazing. I just think it's suited me very well, and I think that we are in such a great position, people of our generation,
Mm.
especially because we saw the before. We've seen the transition, we see the now, but we're so appreciative because we know where it's come from. But we can still work with it. We can still use it. So I think it's very exciting. I'm still like, wow, still.
Yeah, well, on a personal level, the very first time I ever came to the United States, I was writing letters to my parents. We were talking
Yes.
on the phone, and now we can actually, see each other in real time and
Yeah.
talk with, you know, almost perfect sound and perfect image.
Yeah.
And I think that that is definitely, incredibly convenient for, people who, and I think increasingly, more and more people do have connections with abroad,
Yes.
with other countries, and so
Yeah.
that the internet is really important in that sense. But also, I wonder, Pilar, what do you think are the challenges that the internet has brought to the workplace, to education? What do you think?
I think that the of course the flip side of that is that the way we use it and what's happened with it is that there's so much information.
Hmm.
I think almost this there's a lot of information. It can create a lot of opportunity as well. And I think I almost personally sometimes I just like almost short circuit from it. There's also for I mean I'm an introvert and I was very shy. I'm still quite shy,
It's
but
hard to
my
tell. I
I
can say
know. I know.
that.
Well, because so a few things. One, I was brought up to make sure I wasn't shy. So I had to, my mother would say, go, ve a la vecina por unos huevos. Yeah, go and get the eggs from the neighbor. And that was so difficult for me.
Mm,
But, I had to do it. So I did it. Working as a voiceover, you just turn up, at least how I've been working, turn up in a studio, never met the client, never met the engineer, probably just have to work for an hour with them. So it doesn't matter how shy you feel, you've got to deal with it. But the other thing is I like to talk a lot and I do enjoy people. So that's where I'm shy, but when it's worth it, I'm outgoing and I like talking. So where was I going with this? So what the internet has can do for people like me is give us a nice cozy world from which to connect and
mhm,
a nice cozy place from which to connect. And the danger there is that we forget as much to be outside our comfort
mhm,
zone, that we forget to go out and be with people. Um, I don't go into London as much as I used to, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, all these people around me. And maybe I've been talking to 3 or 4 people while I was home. Maybe I've lots of emails, lots of chats, and things like that. But then I'm like, all these people. So that's the only thing is that it can become a separator. It's a
mhm,
wonderful connector, but it can also become a separator. So both on a personal level and at a workplace level, there's those two things. And it's just being aware of
mhm,
where you're comfortable and where you need to be with that. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's
mhm. Yeah, the reason why I was asking you this is
Mhm.
because, one of the ways in which we use the internet, these days is to well, to do a wide variety of things, but one of them is to learn a language, for example,
Uh-huh.
right? And
Yes.
and back in 2020, when we had to switch from in-person classes to online classes, almost at the drop of a hat, really, um, there were certain challenges, obviously, that came up for both the students and the professors to teach those online classes. And I'm sure that in every different discipline, it would be
Hmm.
different challenges, some of them similar, but some of them different. In the case of learning a foreign language, there were many challenges that
Hmm.
actually came up. So, I wonder what you think about online courses as a way to learn a language. Is really an online class, I wouldn't say the ideal, but at least a good way to learn a foreign language?
It depends. So my friend Pinar, who happens to live 10 minutes across the road from me, which is really strange because I rarely have friends who are like 10 minutes away physically. She has Italian lessons on Friday morning with a guy who's in Italy.
Mhm,
And it's great because maybe if she didn't have that, she wouldn't have a class. I mean, this is a one-to-one. So I think it's the same thing is if the teacher and the student can thrive in the medium, then it can be really good
Mm-hmm.
online. It can be online, it can be better. There are some people who might find, again, it really depends. They might find being in a classroom with, I don't know, 10 other people or 20 other people in some cases, but maybe 10, too much. But actually seeing everything through the screen might actually give them a little bit of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of person might thrive there. Another person who actually needs to see the whole person, who, has a small monitor. So, and there's like, I don't know, if there's a group, there's 9 faces, you can't really see very much. And that can drive someone crazy. And so they'd be better in person. So I think it's always for all kind of things that involve those interactions between people. It just really depends on the level of comfort. And then also what you are used to.
Mm-hmm.
If all your life you've been taught in a certain way and suddenly it's done in this, it takes ages to learn. If you're used to teaching in a certain way and suddenly you have the environment in which you're used to teaching removed from you, that's also really scary. So you've got to, and it's about adapting a lot more than the technology. So I think it really depends. Of course, you've got the advantage now that you can, I don't know, you can learn with anyone. Maybe you can find your own teacher, because if you're looking for a, I don't know, Dutch class in London, you have maybe X number of people to draw from, but maybe they are somewhere else. They don't even need to be in Holland. Maybe like the best Dutch teacher for me is based in France. I don't know. So it gives you that everything. I think there's a big, it depends there.
And I guess it also depends on, what you may want to learn the language for.
Yes,
Whether you want
also.
to use it for speaking, for traveling to the country. In my case, for example, I'm interested in learning Swedish because there's a lot of literature about jazz in Swedish, because jazz for the longest time was very popular in Scandinavia. And so there are a lot of records that are produced there. And so I'm interested in learning Swedish in order to read these texts about jazz, and not necessarily to travel to Stockholm and to talk to people there. So
Nice.
As we're talking about language learning, I am in the state of Tennessee in the south eastern United States, and again, the reason why I contacted you originally has to do with a class that I'm teaching at the university, and I'm wondering what you could tell students here in the United States about learning Spanish, in the sense of why do you think that learning Spanish could be beneficial for a student in the United States in the 21st century? Because I feel like there are some students who are not completely convinced that learning a foreign language when they're speaking English already is really necessary. I'm not saying every student thinks that. There could be a part of the students who might think so, but why would it be beneficial to learn Spanish in the United States today? I know that you are based in the UK, but I wonder if you have an idea about that.
I understand that. I mean, I've got very lazy. I tried to learn Dutch and I couldn't. And also all the Dutch know a lot of English. So once you speak English, however, it means you can talk to so many people that you always wonder, why do I need to learn another language? So, I mean, I don't know. I think that, again, learning another language just kind of open a lot of things for you, as in, like you're saying, you want to learn Swedish so that you can understand better something that you love. And what a strange thing to think of. I would never think there'd be someone who wanted to learn Swedish for that reason, because I'm not in the world of music. So I think that there's a couple of things. I think it's always, if you believe that having your mind active is a good thing, then learning another language, it just touches probably areas of the brain. I'm making this up. It probably touches areas of the brain that otherwise you wouldn't use, because as you imagine, you're reaching for something else. So I don't know, maybe I'm making it up, but that would make sense. But at least you're learning a language is a very different experience to learning a lot of other stuff. So just the experience of learning another language, I think, is very beneficial. I don't know, Spanish is quite easy to learn, I think.
Do you think?
As in, I think so.
I think a lot of my students would probably disagree with you about that.
Well, that's mostly depends what you compare it to. I mean, it's very unfair because I didn't have to
Well, if
learn
you
it.
compare it to Chinese, perhaps, yeah.
Well, yes, yes. But I mean, like to learn to read it is easy. Okay, maybe to learn to read is
Mm,
easy because you've got five vowels, and basically, once you understand a little bit the sound of each letter, you just
mm,
get your text and you read it. So that's something nice. You can. I mean, that might be a benefit that you can just learn to use your speech muscles in a different way,
mhm,
which can always be fun. And then I think just again, it's the same story. It's you have access to other things, other books, other content.
mhm,
You can understand. I mean, the US and Spain are very different, even if you take into account how incredibly diverse both countries are, because
mhm,
that's another thing. But if you're ever curious and want to listen to, I don't know, how a Spanish radio presenter thinks about the world, or if
mhm,
you want to listen to them, actually, music. If you're interested in music, how pleasurable is it to hear a nice song in a style completely different to what you're used to
mhm,
and understand what it's about? So I think there's all these things. I think, and it always, I mean, like everything, you have to find a reason for you to do it. So it can either be a practical reason,
mhm,
or it can just be a curiosity and
mhm.
something that it's gonna. I think sometimes until you've tried it, you don't know whether you like it or not. So, but if you've tried it, like really, not one class.
No, and I agree with you about the reason because, for example, when I
Mm,
was 12 or 13, I wanted to learn French because
okay.
I loved the music of Jacques Brel, the
Mhm.
Belgian singer and songwriter, and I wanted to know
Yeah.
what he was singing about. And for example, my father wanted to learn English in the 60s because he loved Bob Dylan. And he
Yeah.
wanted to understand what Bob Dylan was
Yes.
singing about, which even if you know English, sometimes is not easy to
Yes.
tell. But I think that having a reason is important, and sometimes the reasons can be practical, and the students don't necessarily see those
Yeah.
reasons. For example, Spanish in the U.S. for certain lines of work in certain states,
Ah,
in particular,
yes.
including Tennessee. If you're going into, law enforcement or the medical profession, or if you're
Mm,
going to be a lawyer, or if you just going to have a business or working agriculture or something like that, learning Spanish is very important and very helpful. And some of the students
yeah.
can see that, some of the students can't, had never thought about that. But
Yeah.
in my free time, I referee high school soccer in the area here. And
Yeah.
when I'm refereeing those games here in Tennessee, in West and Northwest Tennessee, I use during those games as much English as I use Spanish because there
Yeah.
are a lot of Hispanic players, and so the population of Hispanic origin who speak Spanish has really increased exponentially here in the
Yeah.
U.S. So that would
I
be the reason.
didn't I didn't even think about the practicalities of like a law enforcer or anything because I know that Spanish is spoken very widely in the
Mhm,
US, but I hadn't even thought of that. And also I think if you are in a bilingual culture, which in
mhm,
many places, like you say in the US you are, for me it's also about understanding what's going on around me, even if I'm not completely engaging.
mhm,
So just
mhm,
having I remember when one of the reasons I started learning Dutch was when I met my husband. I just remember being in Amsterdam, and even though everyone speaks English, they still speak Dutch amongst themselves. So it was almost sometimes I went out into the street and I almost felt I was deaf because I couldn't understand
mhm,
what people were saying.
mhm,
So there's also I think there's also different levels of knowing a language. We don't have to all be able to then go and speak out, and do a
mhm,
presentation in the other
mhm,
language. Sometimes it might just be about understanding and then maybe speaking something to get by, for
mhm.
example. So I think that's also important.
Yeah, in the case of Dutch, I studied German and I speak English, so reading Dutch is
Ah,
very
yeah.
easy for me. When it comes
Yes.
to when it comes to actually understanding what they're saying, that's different.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
lot more complicated, but I totally understand.
Yeah.
You were talking about diversity before. How incredibly diverse the United States is as a country, and I think the UK is the same
Mm,
thing, and also Spain. But talking a little bit about current events, we won't go into them too much, but there is a push right now in this country, in the United States, by some groups of people to
mhm.
portray diversity as not a strength, of our country as not a strength of the United States. But you've lived and you've worked precisely in diverse environments. What is your take on that? Do you think of the United States as a diverse country, or why would there be anybody who would be interested in presenting it otherwise?
Yeah, so I do think of the States as a diverse country, as in the experience of living in even one state is not going to be the same as living in another. I mean, I don't
Mhm,
know anything about the States. I know very little, but that's from what I get and gauge, is that's what I feel, is that because it's so huge, even
mhm,
if nothing because of the scale. And the same in Spain. It's very different to live in Madrid, to living in Vigo, to living in Valencia. So I think that just I think recognizing that is a good thing, I think.
mhm,
We don't always all have to be the same, even though because we are under the same banner in a way. So that's one. I love London because let me just go back a bit, because the word diversity just can
mhm,
bring lots of different things. We can be different in one thing, have the same values, but we can have different experiences, different backgrounds, and have the same values. So I've always thought that that's what usually brings people together, are the values. And there's people are very different from us, and people are very polar opposite from us. And there's value in being with both. It's more comfortable to be with people who are like us, because then we feel comfortable, we think we understand them better, so that there's comfort in that. There's loads of value in being with people who are different to us, because there's not one way of doing things.
mhm,
And also because sometimes it just helps to understand why people are the way they are, even if we don't agree with it. It
mhm,
doesn't matter. So I think that's another thing, is that acknowledging diversity, either surface level, which is characteristics we can see, or deep level, which is other things like thinking patterns, being aware that it exists and being comfortable with it doesn't mean that we have to like everyone.
mhm,
That's another thing. And I think that this is not something that's spoken about a lot, is
mhm.
that it doesn't just, you're different to me, I respect you, but you know what? We don't get on
Mhm.
because we're so
Ju-
different.
just like if you are an American and you bump into another American in the Netherlands, for example, you're
Yeah.
not going to necessarily be drawn to that person just because you're both Americans.
Exactly, exactly. So it's all of that. And then I like London very much because people, well, it's strength and weakness. Again, there's people that come from all kinds of places. There's a lot of movement, and so it allows me, one, to find people I'm comfortable with, and also to be a little bit more anonymous, which I
Mhm,
like. The flip side of that is that unless you live, actually, I'm lucky, my neighborhood's quite stable, but it does mean that you don't get to know people around you, and so you don't
mhm,
have any familiarity with people, but that's different. But I am also, it's surprising sometimes, like my first year at Imperial, um, my first, yeah, and the first 3 years of Imperial, I had a very good friend called Zara who came directly from Pakistan. So, in fact, I had a roommate who was second generation from Pakistan, and this one, and Zara was straight from there. I never heard really about the country much. I didn't have a clue what that country was like.
mhm,
And I've learned so much through
mhm,
her. I met her friends, and I saw how, and funnily enough, her and I, because of how our parents had been, her parents had also studied abroad, lived abroad. So it was really interesting that you found familiarity in someone we'd had such a similar upbringing, even if
mhm,
we were in opposite places.
mhm.
And also, I got to learn so much about a world that I'm probably never going to see. So I think there's a lot of value. It makes it more difficult because you have difference of opinion, different backgrounds, different upbringings, different values. So, but yeah.
Well, that was precisely one of the reasons that attracted me about the United States. Of course, I knew about the history and the culture and the music and the
Yeah.
literature and cinema and all of that. But when I first came to the U.S. as an exchange student, when I was a junior in college at the University of Vigo, northwestern Spain,
Uh-huh.
one of the things that attracted me about the United States was precisely the different types of people the different types of people from different parts of the world. That even in a small town like where I was in South Dakota for a year, you could see that there were people from really all over the world, from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, from South America, and I found that very interesting. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to come back to the United States. And instead of becoming a professor of English in Europe, I became a professor of Spanish in the United States. And here I settled and got married and became a citizen and all that. But
How
that would
funny.
not have happened without, that first, study abroad experience. And that's why I always tell the students that studying abroad is very important. And that's also the reason, Pilar, why I decided to teach this class of Spanish 250, which is a class about Spanish culture in English for general education students at the university where I work. And that's how I bumped into this book right here. Let's talk a little bit about this book, The A to Z, or The A to Z of Spanish Culture, Beyond Toros and Flamenco. This is a book that you wrote a few years ago. It's still current.
Yeah.
It has worked really well from my perspective for this type of a class because it talks about Spanish culture from the point of view of somebody who knows Spanish culture but does not live in Spain at the moment. And it's done in English, and it's really highly readable and very interesting. Now, how did the project to write the A to Z of Spanish culture come about?
Some very practical reasons and some less. So I think I wrote it in 2011. I mean, you've got the third edition there.
That's 20, I think it's 2016 for the third
Yeah,
edition or
yes,
something like that.
which has some
2018, 2018.
2018. Okay. So, and also that one has some chapters by Paul Reed, who I met through a Facebook group. And so there were a couple of things. I like writing. It's not, I'm a writer now. I put a label of writer on my head now, but I've always liked writing. And with self-publishing, which already in 2011 wasn't quite accessible, it was just like my dream, just get books out there. Doesn't matter what, just get them out. And there were a couple of things. One is I thought of what might sell. I thought, well, the British really like Spain. They really do. And a lot of them they've either been to Spain when they were little, or they always have some kind of connections, or, they've moved there. There's a lot
So
of,
it's not just on a superficial level. They're actually interested in Spain more in depth.
yes, as in, yeah, I don't know how much in depth. Some people really love it, actually, and they love it so much that eventually they go to live there. But even even the people who just were there when they were little, they still have like this nostalgic. I don't know. It's really interesting that relationship. And so I thought, well, there might be a market there. I could write something about that, and then they might, I might make some money with a book, which would be nice to pay the bills, the electricity bill. And then also there was this thing of it goes back to this diversity thing in Spain, that Spain is not, you don't have one way of living in
Mhm.
Spain. And it's this thing that I would say, for example, I would go back for Christmas to Madrid, where you can get, I don't know, like minus something, where it's
Mhm.
really cold. And everyone was surprised that I came back and I wasn't like super tanned, this summer in Madrid. And it was like, it's really cold in Madrid in the
Yeah.
winter.
Gets in the 20s, I'll say, for American viewers.
Oh,
The
yes,
20s and the
yes.
low 20s, mid
Yes,
20s.
yes,
Yeah.
it's cold. And also, like, well, you talk of Galicia, Galicia is green, and just things like that I thought maybe we should just talk about a few of these things for people who are interested in Spain,
Mhm.
or who've only seen one aspect of Spain, or all these things, the paella and the flamenco. And I'm like, oh, I didn't dance any flamenco, or because it was more Sevillanas, until I came here. I'd
Mhm.
never danced it. I wasn't interested.
And I
So
never have.
you never have, you see,
No.
but that's the thing. Of course, you love jazz. How would you be doing it like that?
I cannot dance anything, jazz or flamenco or sirtaki or anything. No.
Oh, excellent. So that was one. And then at the beginning, I tried to, as I always do, often do, I tried to pull some friends in. It was going to be like a group project. But in the end, of course, I was the one who ended up doing it. And seeing as it was seeing as this is a project that could spiral out of control, and I'm not a historian. I wasn't that interested, to be honest, before about Spain, Spanish culture, because actually that's why I moved away. I didn't feel that Spanish. But I thought, you know what? I think this is just going to be Spanish culture through my eyes. So it's going to be heavily biased. It's going to be very Madrid, very middle class, very 80s, very bicultural person doing it. But that's what it was. And I think that's what people like about it as well, that in doing that, I made it short, which everyone's like, phew. But it's also like a little introduction of things, but it's also how I experienced it. Like, where else would I talk about the the golpe de estado of whatever year it
The
was? I don't know,
coup,
was it
yeah, from
82, the coup with
1981. Yeah.
81. So this just, we experienced it. We
Mm.
were there, and rather than go into whatever history and everything about it, I just told about my experience, what it
Mhm.
was like to, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, so that's why, that's where it came from.
You just said you didn't feel very Spanish. Well, what do you mean by that?
Um, I've never like I think because of my home life, because of my school life, of
Mm.
course, in school we spoke Spanish to the horror of our English teacher who wanted us to speak more English, and we didn't. But a lot of my friends have foreign parents, you
Mm.
know, and I, yeah, I've never felt. I don't feel very Spanish. I still have my Spanish passport because it's the EU.
Mm.
Um, so I feel more like a certain kind of European, but I feel a lot like a Londoner.
Mm.
And then I have this identity crisis because I come from Madrid, but I really like Valencia now.
Mm. Mm.
I've like fallen in love with that city. And I think part of the attraction of Valencia is there are so many expats and so many foreigners living there. So
Mm.
yeah, so I never felt very Spanish. It was just, well, I didn't choose it, so it's
Yeah, well,
part of me. But yeah, it's interesting. I
that's one
don't
of the
know.
reasons why I've never, understood people who are so proud of being from a specific place, because that's something that, is not something you chose. It's something that
Yeah,
was in the cards, I guess, and that's what happened. But
yeah.
that would be a topic for a completely different kind of
Oh
conversation.
yes, God, yes.
You did decide to arrange the book thematically and also in
Mm.
alphabetical order. Why did you choose that kind of arrangement?
I don't remember. Maybe it was a bit because of this group thing that I thought if a lot of us were
Mm.
going to write it, and also I just thought, well, probably the artistic reason would have been there's so much to talk about. How on
Mm.
earth was it? I mean, if it were now, maybe I would have done it chronologically. I
Mm.
don't know. I quite like the voiceover book. It's slightly different. It has an arc. It's chronological, as in it kind of starts at the beginning of my career and takes me all the way through.
Mm.
But with this, I didn't feel, I don't know, I think that it worked. Yeah. Also, I think the topics were it made the topics very specific. And of course, like, I think I haven't looked at this for ages, but like the W one is probably really short.
Well, actually, the
Or,
W.
which
Let
one was the W
me
one?
tell you because I have it right
What was
here.
the,
W is for
whoa, WC.
WC. So
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
it is fairly short.
It is very short. What did I? Oh yeah, it's one page, isn't it? Like one printed page. Yeah. Whereas others, of course, have a lot more to them. Yeah. And it was easy, just easier to start.
How did you go about selecting the topics, though? Because you said that there are a lot of things that you could have talked about. Obviously, when we think about Spanish culture, that's it's
Yeah.
almost all encompassing. And so, how did you decide what to not what to leave out, but what to put in there?
Oh, that's interesting. So a lot of that was done collectively, I have to
Mm.
say. I think there were like five of us. So that started. And I don't know, I can't remember, but some of them were, it was really easy. Like, let me just see if let me remind myself. Yeah. Oh no. Okay, so I was going to say, oh, L was for Lorca, of course. Well, no, it's not. L is for Laico. So
Yeah,
D
so
is
that
for
and you talk
Duende.
about religion there, yeah.
Yeah,
The D
yeah.
is the one where you do
Where
address Lorca,
Lorca,
who
it
is
is
also one of
Duende.
my favorite authors.
Yeah. Oh wow,
And
yeah.
you've translated one of his plays, actually.
Yes, the best play when 5 years pass.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful play because sorry, let me just answer the previous question. I do this all the time. So I think I just probably started with words that came to mind, and then there was a lot of rejigging. So for example, L instead of Lorca, make it for Laico, because how else would I bring the church in or whatever?
Mm,
So
mhm,
it was a lot of that. Yeah, when 5 years pass, you see, is I really like it because it's full of surrealism.
mhm,
And this is another thing that Lorca, everyone, at least in the UK, because you study them as part of either the Spanish A level or maybe even theatre studies.
mhm.
You'll study more likely Blood Wedding, Yerma, or Bernarda Alba, House
Yeah.
of Bernarda Alba. And
And
they
Bernard
are,
Alba is the one that I normally use in the Spanish introduction to Spanish literature class. Yeah.
oh, it's fun. It's so fantastic. And it's just such a snapshot of what was going on in certain parts of Spain then. I mean, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And it's a great book. It's also in prose, well, in
Yes.
lyrical prose. So
And
it's a
there's the BBC production, House of Bernard Alba, which is really
with
good.
is the one directed by Nuria Espert? No.
Yes, that's the one.
Oh my God. I've got a poster. I found it somewhere. I can't even remember where I found it. I have the poster. Yeah. Anyway, so those three tragedies are so famous.
Hmm.
But then the poor guy, he wanted to move on from the more lyrical, poetic thing. He
Mm.
actually wanted to move away from poetry in theater. And so he started to write, and this was one of the first, when 5 years passed, that he wrote, which has surrealism in it. It was based in New York as well. It was located in New York, so set in New York. So I love it. I just love that play. It's so surreal, and it's very rarely done because it's got quite a big cast as well.
Hmm.
And I when I did the translation, I did the translation so we could perform it because I didn't want to pay rights. And I think maybe Lorca was still in copyright, but the lawyer for the estate
Hmm.
was really wonderful to me, so we did it. And then I tried to sell it either to other to publishers or theaters, and everyone said the same thing. Yeah, it's a great translation, but we're not going to sell it. It's just not going to sell. So I
Mm.
thought, okay, self-publish, no problem. Yeah.
Well, I feel like sometime I should invite you again to guest to talk about Garcia Lorca because
Oh
it
yes,
looks
that
like
would be
it
so
really is a
much
passion for
fun.
you. He's also been one of my favorite authors for a long time.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it. Oh my God, yes.
Now, going back to the book, I will tell you that it was very convenient to have it in alphabetical order because I could say to the
Uh-huh.
students, well, for this class period, you should read, chapter N or chapter P or chapter X, whatever it was,
Yeah.
and that was, an easy way to organize the class because the class is not
Yeah.
organized chronologically either, but
Uh-huh.
it is organized thematically. So we talk
Yeah.
about cuisine here, we talk about history there, we talk about media and social media, music,
Wow.
different things in different class periods and different weeks. So that
Yeah.
was very helpful. When you set about to write this book, what was your main goal? Uh, what did you want to accomplish with the book besides selling it and paying the bills? What was the end goal behind your sitting down and writing this book?
Well, one, it was just fun to write. And I have to say that that's always a driver. I have to have three
Mm,
drivers. One is to think that somebody will buy it at some point. And it doesn't have to, but I don't want to write it just for myself. But I have to really enjoy the writing of it. And I think there were a few things. So one is I did want the book to go out as a Spain is not one thing. Like
mm,
every country is not one
mm,
thing. And look, you know these things, but those things, they're only about this kind of Spain or this kind of Spain. So there was that. And if you do want to know a little bit more about Spain, then, here's my vision. Here's what I've experienced.
mm,
And there was an aspect of memoir definitely about it, of not just sharing my life, and I mean it's very small life, this one, but also just it was really interesting to see where my gaps were.
mm,
Like the chapter on X's for xenophobia, I had to do quite a lot of research to see what had been going on in Spain.
mm.
Because, for example, when I grew up in the 80s, there were no Black people in Madrid.
And I tell that to my students as well. If that happened in Madrid, think about in the Northwest in Vigo, a smaller town, even though it's a big city, it's the biggest in the Northwest. But I always, think about when I look around,
Yeah.
around me in the United States and in my classes and my daughter who's 11 in her class around the city. I realized that, growing up in Vigo, everybody looked like me. There was
Yes.
very little diversity in the sense of racial diversity, even cultural diversity. Maybe there
Yeah.
was a classmate who wasn't even from Uruguay, but like his mother was from Uruguay,
Yes.
and everybody called him the Uruguayan, right? But he really wasn't. So that's the extent of the
Yeah.
diversity. So I
Yeah.
do recognize myself in that too.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So and I was in an international school, so at least I knew people from Turkey, from Libya, from all kinds of places. So yes, so that was interesting to just understand what had been going on. So I think yeah, that's mainly. So I think I just like all these things, I have an idea, I start. And it was just going to be like really easy to write. And then it was like, oh, well, I can't leave that chapter like that. Oh, it needs more research. Well, I need a blah, 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 blah. And then it just took ages. But it was, I think it was fun. And it was really fun to come back to again
Hmm.
for the third edition, because I did do a second edition, which I don't remember what I updated. But the third was more about somebody had left a review on Amazon
Hmm.
and they said, yeah, it's very good. It could do with an update. So much has happened. And
Hmm.
this was before Podemos, before I don't know if it was the Cinco de Mayo. I can't remember that time when all the young
The
people,
15th of May, yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah, where all the young people went out into the street. And for me, the reason why I wanted to just, even if it was just talking about that whole movement,
Hmm.
was as someone who'd always had a foot in like the British system and how
Hmm.
things worked in Britain and in Spain, I was really amazed and glad that the young people in Spain were organizing themselves into something that could make a difference.
Hmm.
And so when Podemos was formed, regardless of ideology, for me it was a new political party,
Hmm.
regardless of what you think of them. It was they were forming themselves. There's been a few new political parties in Spain, and this was great not to just have the left, the center, and the right.
Hmm.
Then you
Hmm.
had, okay, a lot of left, well, a few left, a couple right, and there's something in between, and they've come and gone and whatever. And I just thought I liked that very much because it kind of made it a little bit less like a separation down the middle. And it
Hmm.
meant that different people were expressing how they thought the world should look like.
Hmm.
So I think that's why I came back to the third edition. That was fun. But I did have to ask Paul because
Hmm.
Paul was living in Spain at the time. He's British and he was really into much more clued up about what was happening sociologically and politically. So
Hmm.
yeah, so he helped me update that.
Yeah, the title of the book again is The A to Z, or The A to Z of Spanish Culture, and in the very title of the book is the words, or are the words, Spanish culture. Uh, I'm not going to ask you how do you define Spanish culture because
Oh.
we could do a complete series of podcasts on this, but what idea of Spain or what idea of Spanish culture did you have in mind as you were sitting down and writing this book?
What do you mean by what idea I had of
Yeah,
it?
because you were talking about the fact that Spanish culture is not monolithic,
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know. So were you intent on showing this as you were writing this book, which is called The A to Z of Spanish
Yeah,
Culture?
yeah.
You're trying to define Spanish culture in a way,
Yes,
in
yes,
an alphabetical way, if you will.
yes. Yeah, yeah.
But what was your idea of Spanish
Okay.
culture that you had in mind?
So there were a few things. So let's see if I can answer, because it's a really interesting question. So it's funny because of this dual bicultural thing that I grew up with, I always had what I was experiencing living there, and as a person with a Spanish passport and living
Mm-hmm.
in Spain, and what I was always a little bit on the edge of, because
Mm-hmm.
I always had this other way of seeing the world. So both in Spain and in London, I've always been very at home and also an outsider. I feel as much of an outsider in Spain always since I was little as I felt an outsider in London, which is not very much, but I still get that in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that lens. And also a lot of the time and thinking of the audience that I first thought of, which were British people who are interested in Spain, there was always a comparison kind of thing. So I suppose, I'm not sure that I wanted to define it, but actually, in the fact that it was the A to Z,
Hmm.
that's quite a spectrum about culture. And then, so that diversity was something I really wanted to show. The fact that Spanish culture is not this, this, and this.
Hmm.
It's not Toros and Flamenco, which I think was more the case when I wrote the book than it is now. It's not Toros and Flamenco. It's all this. You
Hmm.
can look at it through this lens. So that was my main thing. And even then, you could argue that I didn't give enough of diversity in the book because it's seen a lot through my eyes, but
Hmm.
that's a different matter. So that, in a way, that's also how I experienced it. Sometimes I felt completely like, yeah, I'm there. I'm part of this. And sometimes it's like, whoa, I have nothing to do with this.
Hmm.
Just because, so I think all of that.
In that sense, Pilar, do you think that it was convenient for you to, distance yourself from your own culture, from Spanish culture, whether it be geographically or conceptually even, in order to understand Spanish culture better? Was that a positive thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I'd never, it's really funny. It's just really interesting because it's funny. I don't see it as my culture,
Hmm.
but I don't see anything as my culture. It's
Hmm.
my experience.
Hmm.
So it's my experience of the country. I think that's how I see it. So having been, I mean, 2011, what was 90? I'd already been like 20 years away or something like that. Um, that was quite a distance of not living in Spain regularly,
Hmm.
and also of a lot of changes happening there that I was not aware of because it's changed a lot, even the world that I would have grown up in.
Oh yeah.
So the that physical distance, that time distance, because a lot of the period I was talking about is has gone. Well, a lot of what I talk about in the book is gone. Um, so I think yes, it's definitely easier to look at things because also when you are when you are away from something, then you can see whether that's an aspect of your life, whether it's an aspect of another life, and you can see what it is that's maybe something you would find in that country that you don't find
Mm.
abroad. So it's not just
Mhm.
human nature, but it's human nature that has lived in this way for a while. Yeah.
And
But
that's very
yeah.
interesting to me, Pilar, because I wonder reading the book, and especially now after talking to you for, been talking for over an hour on the recording, and I promise I'll bring it to a close soon. But
Oh, I can
I
talk
do
forever,
I do
as you
have
can
a
see.
question that because of what you're saying, I wonder in what ways is your experience of England or your experience of London different from your experience of Madrid, your experience of Spain? Because, for somebody like me who has also lived in two different countries, and like you, it's been decades since I actually
Mm,
lived in Spain permanently, and I don't think I ever will live in Spain permanently again. And by choice too,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not, it's not, I'm not saying this with nostalgia, and I'm not saying this with
Yeah,
a
yeah.
sense of, heart-wrenching feeling or anything like that. But um, how different or in what ways is the experience of London and Madrid, different for you as a person?
I think, well, it I was going to say it's very different, but yes and no. No way. Um, so I think again, so I left London. Well, I left Madrid. So maybe I didn't leave Madrid. I started living in London when I came to study at 18. So the person you're at 18 is very different, you know.
Hmm.
And your life when you're up until the age of 18 is very different. Also, because I left, then
Hmm.
I left my home. I left my parents behind. So that's also like a way of growing up into someone different. You have this thing, I don't know if it happens to you ever, but like in when I go back to my family, not with my parents, but with like the uncles and stuff,
Hmm.
a lot of the time they still refer to myself and even my husband to us los chicos.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So so I
And
think
they expect that you're going to be like you were back then or behave like you
yes.
behaved back then. Yeah.
So I think that is, I mean, I can't underestimate. that aspect of it.
Mm,
So whether I'd moved to London or France or even to another city in Spain or Canarias, I don't know, something different
mhm,
that gave you that distance. Um, but London was very suited to me
mhm,
for the reasons I said, the anonymity I really like.
mhm,
I am quite entrepreneurial, so like for example, take how I don't know what it's like now, but when I started the theater company, there was a way in which I could access, for example, funding.
mhm,
I didn't have to know anyone already because of the way things are structured here. Of course, it helps. It always helps if you know someone, but I knew where to go. And this is before the internet,
mhm,
but I knew where to go to look for information of who I should talk to. I was able to, this is public funding mainly, I was able to arrange a time to go and meet them. And I was able to sit there and create my network.
mhm,
I think the way in which this would have done in Spain would have been completely different, but this way really suited me. Everything was very organized in that way. There's a lot of, I think by nature, and again, this might have changed, the British society used to really, and still does support entrepreneurship
mhm,
and allow the individual. I suppose it's a bit more individualistic and allow the individual, but it also allowed people to organize themselves as well and organize themselves in a more formal way.
mhm.
So all of that suited me. It was so easy to become self-employed. It's so easy to set up a business. It's, yeah. So that really, really, really suited me. Yeah.
You know, when you say you're quite entrepreneurial, I think that's an understatement, actually. We're talking about, all sorts of all sorts of activities that you've done, not just the
You're
books, but also
all over the place.
podcast. We have virtualnotdistant.com. We have Pilar Writes
Oh.
.com, and podcasts such as 21st Century Work Life, Spain Uncovered, Adventures, not in babysitting but in podcasting, Enclave, the podcast in the key of
Oh,
podcast, which
that's
is
a great
another
one.
podcast that you do, and part of your being entrepreneurial has to do with your production of podcast content. So tell us a little bit about your love of podcast, because
Mm,
I also love podcast. It's for
yeah.
me, podcast is allowing me to do things that I used to do on the radio back
Yes.
when I had radio shows, but taking them to even further than I was able to do 20, 25 years ago. What does podcasting, do you think, bring to the table that is new, that is unique?
Oh, I love it because when you were doing radio, I was probably like recording myself into tapes and pretending to be on the radio. I would have loved to have a
Well, I
radio
was
show.
I was very lucky, and it was merely by chance when I began back in Spain. I told my father,
Yeah.
who, among other things, has written a myriad books for children and for young adults
Oh,
in
wow.
Galician, and he was being interviewed at a radio station in Vigo. And I said to him, "Hey, ask them if they need anybody to do a music show." And I didn't think he was going to come back with any sort of response. He would
Yeah.
forget, or they would say, "Oh, we're not interested." But they actually were interested, and that's how I began doing radio. And I kept doing it then after I moved to the United States,
Yeah.
even more so. So
If
yeah.
you don't ask, you don't get. That's a great lesson. Wow, that's amazing. I love that story. Uh, yeah, so I've always done that. I've always like pretended I was on the radio. So when I realized that you could, I mean, I came across podcasting because I was listening to BBC
Mhm,
and then Radio 4 mainly, and then I saw that they had their things on iTunes, and then from then I discovered. And then when I realized how easy, as
mhm,
in it was super affordable to do it, then I started and I started, I don't know. Again, I just like, I am curious. I like to connect with people. I like to share my thoughts a lot. And I was talking to someone today, which I would have loved to be a modern philosopher. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but I think podcasters for me are the modern philosophers because when you get back to like podcasting, like for podcasting's sake, or because it's something that comes really from the heart of the host, actually, rather than the more, I mean, everything has commercial sides and no,
mhm.
but when it's really about sharing your view of the world, then it's fantastic for that. because, and I do audio only. I never record video just because it's so difficult as well to then
And I
edit.
like audio better than video, to tell you the truth,
Yeah.
because I grew up with that, with
Yes.
listening to the radio,
Yes.
listening to the BBC World Service over the shortwave and all of that. I've always loved the idea of sound more than the idea
Yes.
of video, because then also you could look any way you want. You don't need to be perfectly, dressed up or
Yes.
anything. You can just be in your pajamas and do the podcast. So.
Yes, exactly. There is that. And also um as a podcaster that has mainly done the editing. I mean, sometimes the co-host has taken over, sometimes I had an engineer doing it, but mainly I've edited and I learned to edit. And audio is just so much more easier to edit. And also I like you say, I like the fact that they can't see you. I think that's really fun. And also I do remember listening to radio and listening to a voice, and you picture the person. I mean, now
Mhm.
we have lots of photos around, so probably someone will have seen my photo. So, but before it was like Alejo Garcia, and then it's like you saw the picture. Ah, that's not how I pictured him, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know what that name is. It's the only name I can remember. So what it's done, it's been amazing. And to be honest, I'm probably gonna start winding up the podcasting because I want to write more, and
Mhm.
I've done so much. But it's amazing the one you really find your voice, I think. And I wonder
Mhm.
whether the fact that how I've been doing it, which is just you and the microphone, or you and someone else on the microphone,
Mhm.
I've really found, I don't know, I found what makes it what I find interesting. I found what I value, what I stand for, what I think is important, all of this. And this sometimes is done in a solo way. Just I've come to the microphone to do like a 10-minute episode of something, and something's hit me as I was talking aloud on my own
Mhm.
and gone, wow, okay, that's it. That's important. Or talking with a co-host or guest going, I'd never thought of that way. Wow, that um, and the fact that it's portable, and the fact that it's so intimate, because it's all
Mhm.
about the voice. And because you're not seeing the person, you've got to work a little bit harder at seeing them.
Mhm.
And I wonder whether that strengthens the relationship as well. I don't know. I don't have any, I don't know.
Well, I
What
think
do
it
you
does for
think?
me because,
Yeah,
I've
no?
always been more drawn to people's voices than to their actual physical appearance. And so
Yeah, yeah,
I think that comes from, listening to the radio so much when I was growing up.
yeah.
But definitely, it's I think also the podcast allows for a certain genre of conversation that I
That's
think
it.
it's being lost in the mainstream media, almost as
Yeah,
though it couldn't be sold, and I don't understand that, because I do think that, when you have an interesting conversation between two or three people, or even more, but two is enough.
yeah.
You just get into it and just don't let go.
Yeah, I think the independent nature of the podcast as well, which is really what attracted me to it, is really important as well, because it means that the conversations can be a little bit freer. They really are about the conversations, and people can really be connecting to each other as well during the conversation. And in listening to that, that's quite special.
Mhm.
And there's no time restriction. I mean, you can decide as a podcaster to have a time restriction, but there is none.
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
unless you have a production, you have to pay the producer to be there with you or whatever. But and that is wonderful. And also, you don't have to record on schedule sometimes. As in, I mean, if you're recording with someone else,
Mhm.
you do, but you can release your episode at a certain time without you having to be doing that. There's a
Mhm.
freedom for the listener to listen to it when they are ready to listen to you, not
Yes.
when it's coming on air. So there's all the logistics, and then I think you're completely right that in its purest form, it's a very different kind of communication experience. Yeah.
Well, Pilar, you were talking about the time constraints and all of that,
Yes.
and so I think that just about gives me a chance to wind
Yes.
down the conversation. I could have stayed much longer talking to
I
you
know. It's
for
really
a lot
great.
longer. I have other questions, but I think this is a good moment to put an end, punto y seguido, as they say
Yeah, but I like that. Put
in
this in.
Spanish. and my final question, you mentioned before you've written several other books. One of them that I think would probably be interesting if the students or anybody has laid hands on this book, The A to Z of Spanish Culture, and they like what they read in there. There's another book that's, I think, the natural follow-up, not because it's related to it, but because it's also written by Pilar Ortí, which is Hi, I'm Here for Recording, which has to do with her work and her experience as a voiceover artist. And you've written several books. You're active in many different media. Tell us a little bit to finish, if you will, about any projects that you're working on right now that you might be able to disclose. You said you wanted to let go of podcasting a little bit and work a little bit more on writing. What projects are you thinking about for the near future?
Oh my God, so many, but I'll talk to you about three. So first, thank you very much for recommending the voiceover book because I think it's a very good follow. If you've enjoyed A to Z, then yes, I think it's a nice read. I'm rereading it. I found some mistakes. I'm gonna do something with it.
I never
Anyway,
reread or rewatch anything I do because I'm always going to find mistakes.
yeah, but I want to, well, that project, I want to turn it into an audiobook
Oh,
because before I had to go into the studio, which is very expensive, but now there's the software to be where I'm going to test the software and see whether I can put, especially that book, into an audiobook. So that is one plan. I'm writing two books at the moment. I have lots of others in my head, but one of them has the working title of All the World's a Workplace. But it's going to be the working title because it's a book talking about my experience of the world of remote work since over the last 10 years, not just as a consultant, but as a person who's been looking at what was going on. And I've used generative AI, mainly ChatGPT, to create some Shakespeare, to adapt some Shakespeare scenes and soliloquies into scenes and soliloquies about remote work, about an
no.
aspect of remote work. And this is going to sound very familiar to you and our viewers, which is I started and I thought, oh, this would be a nice idea. Oh, maybe I can make a book. Oh, and now it's like almost a memoir of those 10 years. So it's my experience of that. And of course, it's very much like the A to Z, but it's in 12 chapters and it's about remote work. So that's one. And that's, I don't know, hopefully I publish it around June next year. I'm self-publishing it. It's taking, again, it's taking a long time. Then I'm co-writing a book with a lady called Brie Kajati, who's a writer and a journalist who lives in Australia, who I met through Tim. And we did a podcast season of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast on connection and disconnection in remote teams. So looking at loneliness. And Brie was leading on that. And she interviewed a lot of people. She has like really good episodes with multi-voices, very documentary, radio documentary style, more radio than podcast, and of a certain kind. And for years, I was like, oh, we've got to do something with all this material. And finally, we're doing it. We're creating a book. It's going to be a little bit more practical. And we're co-writing. We're also using a generative AI, but Claude. And it's helping us one is to just get it done. We know what we think about it. We've got all the source material, so we can get lots of material also with the bot, but also it's helping us to find a style, like smoothen out the voice, because there's the two of us. So again, that will come out next year, mid-year. And then something completely different is I'm training to be a Pilates instructor.
Oh.
Because I love Pilates and I've been doing it for years, and I decided I wanted to understand the teachings of it better and the theory behind it better. And if I do anything with it, sorry, I keep banging my mic. If I do anything with it, it will be adapting it for actor training. So it's really good for the breath. It's very good for body self-awareness. And I think if I do anything with Pilates, it will be that and a book.
Of course.
Of course. And actually, and an audio course. And an audio course as well.
So, as you were saying before, about, you were talking before about being entrepreneurial, all those
Oh God.
projects at once. It sounds like a lot, but I feel like if there's something if there's somebody that can do that kind of thing,
Oh
is
God.
is you, Pilar. It's been really a pleasure chatting with you. I would like to, recommend that everyone picks up a copy of Pilar Ortí's books. One of them, the one that was the excuse for this conversation, although we didn't really concentrate completely on this, but that was the excuse, the A to Z or the A to Z of Spanish culture. You can find more information about Pilar Ortí at virtualnotdistant.com, pilarwrites.com, and a myriad podcasts that she has been working on over the years. And, pretty soon there'll be more projects that will be coming to fruition. Pilar, thank you so much for taking the time to answer my call this morning, afternoon, almost evening
Yes, yes.
for you. And you're, obviously permanently invited to come back and chat with us whenever you got a chance to and would like to do it.
We have the Lorca one
That's
pending,
right.
so
I've
we will
written that
do that
down.
one.
So
Yeah, we will do that one. Thank you so much for giving me the space and for sharing your experience as well. I feel like a lot of how we got to where we are has I don't know. I feel there's some similarities, of course, lots of differences, but it's been really nice and a little bit nostalgic as well. So thank you very much, and thank you, viewers.
Well, thank you. And this brings to a close a new episode of the Written Page podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez from Jackson, Tennessee, right here in the United States of America. And our guest today has been voiceover artist, writer, podcaster, actress with, as I said at the beginning, huge and very interesting online presence, and also the author, among other books, of the A to Z of Spanish culture. This has been a new episode of the Written Page podcast, which very soon you'll be able to watch and listen to on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments, leave them underneath the video, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye, everybody, and thank you, Pilar.
Bye, gracias.